Pressing on with some of what we were talking about last time, if you recall, regarding the apparent, how it is that the apparent aims and the points of man's ordinary metaphors and parables seem to reach some sort of conclusion, or else nobody would remember them. The moral, the conclusion, the punchline. And me pointing out that from a more revolutionist view, to use that kind of thinking, what that represents, the conclusion from ordinary parables, metaphors, symbolism would be simply a starting point. As per, for instance, the example we were using, the old one of, quote, in the beginning I saw a mountain as a mountain, then I saw a mountain as a metaphor, and then I returned to the point of seeing a mountain as being a mountain. Now, even amidst, we will assume we're not being pushy. I know you're not being. To assume, to operate upon the basis that metaphors, parables, and all sorts of attempted non-literal thinking is man's admirable attempt to think more objectively, more expansively, more insightfully. And so take metaphors, parables, and all of their ilk, without us splitting hairs about the difference between symbolism and metaphor and simile and all that stuff. But just take it all as being non-literal thinking. The attempt. Let us take that as being the also attempted higher aspect of human thought. And so give that kind of credit to start this off where it would ordinarily be due, but then to realize this, even while that's going on, the old intellect, while it is doing that, at whatever degree it seems to be, no matter how insightful, no matter how literary, no matter how the parable or the metaphor may be laced with literary allusions, with heavy symbolic significance, historical footnotes, dripping with sarcasm, city wit. No matter how all of that may be, remember this, look at it. You still have the intellect, even at that better attempt, you still have it faced with. You still have it confined to a polarized conflict. That is, the 3D intelligence, without being able to analyze it, no one ever has, because it is, I repeat one more time, it is taken. I'm not questioning that. It's just a phenomenon of the city, as much as in the city, up follows down and your money follows the IRS. But the 3D intelligence, even when it's operating at what appears to be the metaphorical level, it believes that in some way it is pushing the limits, the envelope of ordinary thought, that it is in some way struggling, if not succeeding, but struggling to get beyond the limits of mundane, routine, literal, crude thought. There is an unrecognized limitation to all of this, wherein the polarized conflict is still at the heart of it, and it operates in this way. That when a man, an ordinary intelligence, is apparently thinking in non-literal manners, thinking metaphorically, this polarized conflict that is inescapable is thusly, that the intellect, without thinking in this manner, but you'll surely hear it, it perceives the metaphor or the parable as some way being in conflict with, as opposed to the thing which it represents. It comes out then that the mountain, in the beginning and then in the end of the apparent sequential movement of some man's insight, some man's intellectual awakening, a thing of a mountain going from being simply a mountain into a metaphor and then back to a mountain. No matter how that was cut, no matter how it was institutionalized in some individual here and there throughout history, either on a philosophical or religious basis. The analyzation has never been there. It does not see that it is taking the mountain and the man's thoughts of the mountain, whether it be literal, would be of no consequence, or metaphorical, which would apparently be of some real consequence. It would apparently be a kind of benchmark for someone who could think. I mean, this is not all that sticky. When people speak metaphorically, it's an ordinary person. When you do it, when your old intelligence does it, when you read someone doing it, and assuming again that you are sane, that you're not living out there with the birds in the park, that you're part of life's middle of the bell curve, ordinary humanity, part of the breathing, functional parts of life's nervous system. Then when you hear, when you read, when you're exposed to metaphorical thought, there's no doubt about it, you take it, whether you're interested in it or not, but you take it, if you notice it, as being an attempt at superior thought. That in some way is an attempt, and if it succeeds, of course it succeeds, but an attempt to rise above literal thought. That is in some way an improvement. And it could be, perhaps, an extensive, a staggering improvement. But look at the weight. Look at the way in which it is not free. Because it would apparently be, if it ever tried to analyze it, it would apparently be to say, all right, a mountain is no longer a mountain to me. Just using, of course, in this case, a metaphor as a metaphor, because it could be anything else besides a mountain. Warfare, eating, sex, love, poetry, the weather, life itself. It apparently then is taking the mountain, and a man saying, I am to the point that I can look upon a mountain and I now no longer simply see a mountain. I see the mountain as a metaphor. And I did a little bit of this shtick last time we were taping. You can do it. A man can look at, on vaudeville, a man can look at a baseball game. But now some of you got to be good enough. You can make up that kind of slop as fast as I can. Stuff. Metaphors. And it apparently has taken this mundane activity such as a baseball game or a mountain and is now taking it to some new height to say, I now look upon the game of lacrosse and I do not simply see men running around, hurting their knees, banging into one another. I now see the game as a metaphor. It in no way has been separated from the thing. It in no way has risen above the thing. It is, in fact, now, without there being any operational awareness of it, it is now taken to be some sort of competition, that there is a conflict, that in some way the mountain obviously is separate from the mountain as a metaphor. But now consider from a more subversive view that as long as man's intelligence, as long as your intelligence is allowed to think that there is a difference between a thing and what your intelligence may think about the thing, then as Professor Hill would say, you got trouble. You got trouble right here in Revo City, as in Revolutionist City. In this case, it doesn't rhyme with anything. From the revolutionist invisible tower in the city, if you were looking at it from that way, you would see a seamless, breathing continuum between what people think, what people perceive to be things, from mountains to games to philosophies to ideas, from what men think or perceive something to be there, such as a mountain, and then what they think the mountain to be. There is, I don't mean this in any strange, I just thought how that gets kicked around in science fiction, but there is a continuum, simply a seamless spectrum running from the mountain to the mountain as a metaphor. The ordinary intellect cannot conceive of it as such, which is another way to look at what would apparently, at first blush, be a representation of a man's internal achievement, to wit, going from, I once saw the mountain as a mountain, or I originally did, then I saw the mountain as a metaphor, and now I see the mountain as a mountain. All right, he is apparently, the thinking of this person has apparently gone from a crude level, a very specific literal level, that when I was younger and dumb and first starting on this great mystical intellectual quest, I looked up on a mountain and I saw a mountain and I thought, hey, there's a mountain. Then after many, many, many whatevers, I move along, and now here in my middle years, I looked out in the midst of my journey. I looked about, and first I thought I saw Beatrice, but that was another story. But here in the middle of my years, I looked out, and then I saw the mountain, but the mountain was no longer just a mountain. The mountain was now a metaphor. And then I moved on a little long, and now I'm getting into the, what old people like to call it, the ripeness of my years. Now I'm moving along this way, and I looked back, and I see the mountain, and I'll be damned. That's right people talk. It says, and now I see the mountain again as a mountain. There apparently is a quite clear-cut distinction. In this case, I was just using 3 steps, but that's been one of the historical ones. I was a sinner, I recognized my sin, and I repented of my sin. Or I realized that man is childish or is born flawed. I repented of my flawedness. I sought help. I found help. There is apparently quite clear-cut movement, whether it be 3 steps or whatever, but 3 is about all you can talk about. After that, everybody really takes a nap. If you don't believe it, just talk to your own brain. That's why the polarized world operates so efficiently. What flavor do you want? We have chocolate, vanilla, and you never fix to say another flavor, and you just about lose your appetite. You're dying for an ice cream, but if they say we got chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. You think, well, Jesus, if they're going to talk me to death, I'll just go somewhere and have a hot dog. Well, at any rate, I saw the mountain as a mountain, I saw the mountain as a metaphor, and now I see the mountain as a mountain. That is quite clear-cut. The stages. But what I am now suggesting to you from another view that is not natural to man, you can look upon this as being a seamless, endless spectrum, and that there is no such clear-cut distinction. Now, it's not just in the example of the mountain, and it's not just in any sort of perceived scenario of a man being on some sort of mystical quest. From a greater view, you could look at all thinking as being metaphorical, even with real crude people, like shoe repairmen and orthopedic surgeons. I'm sorry, dentist and body and fender man. I don't need more people writing me. We had it narrowed down to attorneys, dentists, body and fender man, and accordionists, and zither players. It is getting out of hand, isn't it? Presbyterians. I was just thinking of the latest bomb threats of who we... Never mind. Without thinking, without even believing that one was thinking metaphorically, just right quick, you could see that in a quite real sense, all thought at the secondary level is metaphorical, in that, even if it was most crude, no one trying to be poetic whatsoever, but you could look upon all thought as being metaphorical in the sense that all thinking is a sound, whether you say it overtly or whether it's to your own brain, whether you and your partner are chatting up. It is a sound, it is a sensation in the word, whatever it is, or the term, that is representing something else, which is the basic definition of a metaphor. Is you're taking one thing, one word, one idea, and making it represent something else. Then what is all thought? And I assume that you can right quick jump past a very childish level of saying, well, a thought is what it is. That's true enough if you can't think. But you've got to realize that the thought itself, no matter how crude it is in a sense a metaphor, because the ordinary intellect, even if it says, well, that doesn't make any sense, or that's stupid, or it's not true, and you say, well, wait a minute, is the word itself, is the word ice cream the same as a bowl of ice cream? That's certainly not. Well, in a sense, it is metaphorical, because there is a difference between whatever it is and whatever the person is saying it is. Not because what he says it is wrong, but there is simply a difference that is not perceived at the ordinary level. But then could you take that a little further? I wasn't trying to lead you into some ancient cul-de-sac of philosophical self-eroticism. But could you see a little past that to where it does get interesting? Because that has been brought up before, just in the city, of people playing that kind of useless intellectual game at that level of saying, well, words are one thing and what they represent something else. People's been through that since before the Greeks were wearing long trousers. But there is another way, just almost to the horizon of that the ordinary intellect could never take it. And that's consider the possibility that all thought is metaphorical, but no, wait. Not metaphorical in the sense that no matter what word or what thought you have about an ice cream cone or a mountain, that, well, it's not the same. As I said, people's already been through that without knowing, not being able to take it to anywhere worthwhile. But now consider it further, the possibility that all thought is a metaphor for, are you ready? For some other thought. Now that would change the game in such a way that all of the observers upstairs in the scene would have to tell all the dealers. They'd have to send down word, close down all the games until we can regroup our neural cells. Because to say that thought, that words are, as I started this side trip, are metaphors themselves, no matter where they're intended to be, no matter where they would be accepted to be, that any kind of thought, to say, how do you like my new suit? That's a metaphor. Because you're talking about two different things. You're thinking about two different things. You're thinking about that you're talking about a suit, but then whatever it is you say cannot be exactly the same as a suit. I'm sure that there's still, I'm just positive, there's still little fresh-faced, bright-eyed boys and girls in Philosophy 101 sitting around drinking coffee on campus right now, going through that. And surely many of you have already lived out that part of the DNA history of man, and it goes nowhere. It's a hobby. Although it's true enough that all talk can be seen as being a metaphor, since at the ordinary level there's no doubt, it's just ridiculous to say otherwise, that it's metaphorical in the sense that the word mountain is not the same thing as a mountain. You just can't stop there and go, God, boy, is that heavy. You know, unless you're still 17, you just came off the farm, and about the most intellectual challenge you ever had in your life was, which cow did I milk first this morning? You might consider that was heavy info. But past that is what's interesting, that the ordinary intellect, you'll never find this in a philosophy book, because it is getting right to the outskirts of city thinking. It is getting to the point that when you look out to the highway, the road going out of town, and it does, as you know, looking, it gets like this. And of course, everybody in the city knows why. But I'm going to tell you, it's got nothing to do with the laws of perspective or the limits of human sight. It actually gets smaller. Because you're getting to the edge of the 4D world. But at any rate. So out there is where the intellect could never take it. It's not that all words are metaphors for what they represent. That's all right. What if all thought is a metaphor, not for what it represents, but all thought is a metaphor for some other thought. Now, those of you who might be, let's say, getting good at this, however that would be judged, would that not answer a lot of questions? If all thinking, there's no judgment, there's no quantitative indication even hinted at here. It's just, what if all thought? Not to pick out some thought and say, well, that is potentially so good, or this particular thought is pregnant with error. Just what if all thought is metaphor for some other thought? And of course, don't go any further right now and say, well, what other thought? Just what if it just calm down? What if all thought is actually metaphor for some other thought? Just say period in the case. Or turn the page for the night. Would not that be interesting? That all thinking represents, I know, some unconscious, no. All thinking is symbolic, no. What if all thinking is a metaphor for, I know what, it's a metaphor for whatever it thinks it's talking about, no. What if all thinking is a metaphor for some other thinking? Well, we can all play dirty. What if the fourth dimension is a metaphor for the fifth dimension? I can't resist, since I'm being prodded by the prompter, to say again, wouldn't that explain a lot? Pretty cheap way of putting it. Wouldn't that make you believe that that might explain a lot? Wouldn't that make you feel like you'd almost accidentally ignited your Zippo in your pocket? See, with no further judgment about the era of man or ups and downs, just what if, and now I'm saying 4D reality as being the real outer limits of what contemporary old intelligence can think about. But what if life, as man knows it, with no judgment whatsoever, big enough to take everyone else's judgment? That as I started to say this and made that grand hand gesture, that life, all of life, and suddenly we got to take time out, which is fine when you get past the 4D world because there is no time out. Somebody look outside the door of the closet and see if there's any extra time out there. So I say all of life, and we have to stop. And how many folks is it now? 15 billion? Do you realize they have finally arranged it? The last figures, I think they're out, that the population of the world is perceived to be now the same as the leading scientists, cosmologists, perceived to be the age of the universe. I got no idea what that means. One person for every year of the universe. So I say, what if all of life, and then we have to pause, and the 15 billion people all throw in their little bit. You mean life, somebody says, oh, you mean life? And somebody else writes a poem about it, and somebody else sings a hymn. Everybody points out the flaws of life. So we take time out and everybody does that. It's like they're trying to describe Montana or Alaska. Like they got some exception. Wait a minute, you don't mean this part of life. When you say all of life, you cannot mean the part of life, and they point out a part that they don't like. Not being able to see themselves that they are a living example of a metaphor, because even if they say that's not part of life, it is now because the bastard just threw it in. Well, they just said it. If all of life, now wait a minute, you don't mean the parts of life, and they point out something that perhaps over 14 billion of the 15 billion people, as soon as the person says, wait a minute, if you're going to say something about all of life, and plus if you're going to make those serious hand gestures, I'm assuming that you're going to say something important, and in all humility, perhaps we go, well, maybe. They say, wait a minute, let's be perfectly clear about this. You're not including such things as Richard Nixon, or jelly-filled donuts that when you get them home, they have no jelly inside. You know, that sort of thing. In other words, the kinds of thing, and perhaps then a good percentage of the 15 billion people all waiting their turn, they hear that and they'll go, here, here, yes, oh yes. Do you understand? It's too late now. If you didn't want Richard Nixon or wet clothes on a cold morning, if you didn't want that included, why the hell did you have to say it? Because now it's in there. Well, I don't want it included. Okay. We won't include it. Does that make you feel better? And they go, yes. So you don't understand. That'd be like saying, well, here we are in Alaska, and you said it was big enough for all of us. And I said, yes. You said, well, at least it's not big enough for this old dirty tin can I brought along. I just wanted to show you this is the kind of thing we don't have here. All right, if you say so. Do you understand? But once you're in the closet of Alaska, you can't get it out. Well, we're not going to have it here, right? I just brought along to show you that this kind of thing that I don't have here. That's fine with me, sir. You're captain of your own soul. Do you remember where we were? So if you said that all of life, and after everybody put in their shot, everybody gave life a good kick, everybody tried to give it a body punch, and as you all know, you can forget ideas of Smoking Joe and Muhammad when he was good. Ali, that is, not the prophet. Life can take, body blows are nothing. You can kick life in the privates, you can hit it in the goobers, you can give it low blows, body punches to the heads, you can do anything you want to, but please note, life can take a punch. Life can take any punch you give it. So the 15 billion people, they throw it in. Everybody takes their shot at life, gives it a kick, gives it a hit, and life and I stand there. However long it takes 15 billion people to take a cheap shot, or even an expensive shot. So life takes it all, and then I say, may I continue? So we'll assume, for the sake of this made-up story, that the 15 billion people say, all right, go ahead. So we say, all of life, let's take it as being the fourth dimension, all of life could be, I suggest to you 15 billion people, now that you've got the bile and the vitriol out of your system, I trust, all of life could be seen as, now remember before I say it, we have let this description, and think about it, not because I'm saying it, think about it, not at street level. I say, or somebody says, we all say, this is our bit for the night, we say, all of life, and pause for a second, and ponder the 15 billion people, including yours, that took a shot, that, wait a minute, do you mean? Yes. When you say all of life, and somebody over here says, do you mean? And they throw in. We got to go through all these 15 billion people, the apparent different cultures, different religions, different languages, and all 15 billion throw in their shot. Do you mean so-and-so? Wait, it can't be that. So we go through, you got it? In other words, we are now in Alaska, and we have taken everything that anybody had back where they lived, everything they liked, everything they didn't want there, and it's all there. We now have the big AC, the Alaskan closet, or the infinite closet. We now have everything that any human could say about life. You got me? Even that hurts people's brains. I see some of you. And it's just simple when you put into words and you get a glimpse of it, that everything, including a man over here says, well, wait a minute, if we're going to talk about all of life, I don't want these crazy things, imagination like people believing in God, I don't want that. Okay, you got it. Somebody says, wait a minute, that ain't so bad, God, but I don't want this crap about UFOs or people from other planets. Okay. Somebody says, I don't hear anything about love, all this love. We're talking about sex, and everybody trying to write, no, I don't want to hear anything. We say, all right. But you do follow before I press on. We take it all. The people say, I don't want that included. Now, somebody says, if you're going to talk about all of life and do those kind of serious gestures, I mean, this is the kind of stuff you got to pay money. Even through a correspondence course. And you say all of life, and somebody says, wait, I'm trying to go along with this. I'm trying to follow it. I have some hope that this is going somewhere. Do you now? But if you're going to say all of life, you know where you were. Yeah, I was saying all of life. And I paused, and I gave them all a chance. The person says, wait a minute. Does that include? They put it as a question. They do it as an accusation. Wait a minute, that can't be. Or they want to do it as an exclusion. Well, wait, if we're going to talk about all of life, and I'm going to listen to this and try to get something from what you're going to say, if you ever finish, then if we're talking about all of life, I definitely want to know for a fact that you're smart enough that you're not including, and then they fill in their part, like you're not including religion. Ideas of gods or demons or ideas of the subconscious or ideas of weather forecasting actually exists. So whatever they say, we go, yeah, right, okay. And they say, we don't want that included. Okay, got you covered. So we got it all, you got that? Now we're back to all of life. But now this is everything. It's not just the thing of life, for understand. It's the thing of life and it's the metaphor for life. You already forgot. That is what everybody, the 15 billion people, put in their shot of what they said life is, what it's not. And what it is that I'm going to mean when I say all of life. And what it is I don't mean. You know, if I'm sane. And of course I show my Santa when they say, well, you're not going to include stuff like love or honesty. And I go, got you. I know exactly what you mean. People will take that. You already know that trick. Couldn't agree with, know exactly what you mean, sir. Next. Well, wait a minute. You're not going to include Republicans. You're not going to include fascists. Or you're not going to include... No, got you. Of course, it helps maybe it's like you're taking notes. So we got them all. You understand? It's not just life, whatever that is. We have now life. We have the full spectrum because we now have life, the thing, and we have the complete, full complement of life, the metaphor, because we have given all 15 billion people the opportunity to put in their bit about what is not life. So do you understand? It's all covered. If that's too complicated, if we're going to use the mountain instead of life, we have now the 15 billion opinions, observations, comments about the mountain. All 15 billion people. I don't care how much they overlapped, how much they diverge in their observation, but we now have 15 fucking billion notions, comments about what the mountain is. Now, would you agree, may I press on for a second? Would you agree then that no matter what the mountain may or may not be, from the human view, that is from thinking about a mountain, that is from a mountain as a metaphor, it's covered. I would assume that you look fairly reasonable and that you would not stay awake, sit there and listen to 15 billion people give their observation. But assuming that someone was staying there doing it. Then when it was all over, and I asked is anybody left? Everybody's had their turn. That whatever could be thought and said about the mountain has been thought and said. You'll agree to that, will you not? And I say, is there anything else? No, that about covers it. All the observations that agree and all those that disagree, but they're all there. Can we, for heaven's sake, press on? All right. So now when I say and do all of life, you understand, if you're following this, there is nowhere else to argue. There is nowhere else you can't get in another kick. Life is now black and blue. It's been kicked, rabbit punched, elbowed from top to bottom. You can now no longer look at life and say, well, wait, he's got a bruise over here. He's been mistreated. Life would now be one bruise. Do you understand? Or there's no place to say, wait a minute, your comment about what life's going to be, this is going to be your personal observation. You're going to say, well, life is like an orange or some crap. No, I'm not. I'm going to say that life is whatever you 15 billion people said it was, including what you said it wasn't. Because did I not, to all 15 billion people, did I go, no, exact, got you, know what you mean. Yes, sir, oh, yes, oh, yeah. So don't say that there's anything left. And don't say that, wait a minute, you're going to go, life is like a trumpet without a spit valve. You've got to see that I'm covered. You've got to see this is the kind of position that people like Pancho Pilate, back when he used to drive the Cisco Kid, this is the kind of position they were always after. The Athenian Senate. Everybody wants to have clean panties. Everybody wants to say, nah, You know, it ain't my responsibility. I'm just a bureaucrat. I just work here. But see, if somebody could go through this, you have truly got clean hands. In other words, it is an unassailable position that no one can say with any validity that, wait, you're about to say life is, and then you're going to make some metaphor. You're going to do something, no matter how it may apparently be insightful or intelligent. It's going to be your friggin' personal opinion. Wrong, wrong, wrong. You might as well be in River City shooting pool, because that will rhyme with something. It's no longer anyone's opinion. It is the 15 billion observations. It is the totality of everything. It is that the world is big enough, life is big enough for everybody, or everybody wouldn't be here. The people that life's not big enough for are not here. I don't mean they're dead. They're not here. Now, having, and I do not believe that George Frederick, were he alive today, is that the best? Or perhaps Mahler. I don't believe that anyone would say that there has been a shorter intro, overture, preface to anything. But I hope it will be worthwhile, because it's kind of a hypnotic. It's supposed to lull you into all of life. Have you got me now? All of life. And there's no way out unless you're still dealing with a sparrow's brain, and of course taking it as being your own. There is no way out. When I say all of life, you cannot go, well, here it comes. Some other crackpot's opinion about what is life. No, no, no. No opinion. It's not even a fact. It's just all of life. And anything that you tried to say is too late. Or if it's not too late, it's now included. In other words, you're one of the 15 billion and you want a second shot. All right, a second shot. Because you're going to take what we said. I was one of the first ones. You're going to take what all of us said, and now you're going to say all of life is, and you're going to do something weird with it. I mean, like you assume that's going to be an exception. That is now a part of it. Are you finished now? Yeah, but it's still a trick. Okay. Know exactly what you mean, sir. Are you ready? All of life might be a metaphor for another life. That is the absolutely, neurally intangible that religion and philosophy and all sorts of things are replete with for thousands and thousands of years. But again, any of you who can press on, the human intellect has always arranged so that when something sounds like a metaphor, that apparently is some sort of conclusion. Well, I'll give you another one. If the good old one is normally credited to Plato, I guess, that life is like a shadow play, that we're living in a cave and we look upon our lives and the lives of others, the history of man, as being something real when they're actually shadows and there's something else going on. Like there's a fire going on, there's actually people, and we're looking upon shadows. Oh, ooh. It's from that into religion, and that everyone's life is some sort of sham, or that everyone's life is just a little make-believe, in the most religious sense, that the life here is kind of a preface. It's us rehearsing, and that someday we'll graduate either to Broadway, from being here in Philly, off Broadway, we'll graduate in the big time, or else that big director, when our time comes, is going to say, they're going to throw you down to the Borscht Belt or take away your equity card and you'll never work again in this town, son. But at any rate, that there is some kind of real life possible, and then some sort of pseudo-life. That's everywhere. Many people with no religious and no philosophical particular bent have thoughts like that. But it goes nowhere because it is taken as a conclusion. And even with ordinary people, if you talk to them a second, they would understand metaphor. They say, yeah. It feels like that that ordinary life, the way in which I'm living it now, and I'm talking about somebody who'd never even heard the word. If you talk to them a few minutes and got their interest, and you told them what metaphor meant, and they go, yeah, you're right. I never thought about it that way. That's weird. But now that word, what a metaphor? Yeah. Sometimes I do feel that way, that the life I'm living every day, I'm just driving along, going to work, doing the same crap. Somebody always on my case. I'm always in debt, and it doesn't amount to anything. It's almost as though there's got to be something else. Something inside of me says, yeah, I gave up church and all that stuff. I don't know, but you're right. It does seem like what I'm doing is a metaphor. That is taken. The guy would take that as being, he might say, well, I'm glad I talked to you. Because he would take it as though this is maybe not a red letter day in my life, but maybe a little off orange. I'll remember this. Now, of course, if it goes beyond that kind of ordinary crude thinking, then those that are aspiring to be at the more leading edge even of mechanical thinking, they take metaphor. They take even the insight that life itself, descriptions, ideas, might be metaphors for something stronger. That is taken as being case closed. What if it's not case closed? What if that is where the highway is getting like this at the horizon? Sometimes I believe I can almost see outside this universe. That is, sometimes I think I can almost see beyond my own limits. Or people used to say, sometimes I believe that I might be able to feel, I might be able to get in contact with the great gods and the spirits and actually transcend my own self. They're looking at the edge of the universe. They're looking at the edge of the neural universe, which is all that's of any great consequence. Well, in the sense, that's all you can change, unless some of you are planning to try to use this to rearrange the Milky Way. To look at the edge of the universe is to look at the edge of where you can think. And the edge of where you can think, just ordinary people, the edge, the most exemplary description of the edge of the universe is metaphor. And they're correct that it makes no difference to somebody going somewhere else. But at that level, it's not incorrect. Because an ordinary person to be able to think metaphorically, relatively speaking, is certainly thinking better than an insurance adjuster or someone who works for Sears in the small appliance department. What we're asking for, I don't need more people writing me. 20 of us work for Sears. How about that? At that level, I just want you to understand this. As you should know, it's not an attack on metaphor and it's not any sarcasm. At that level, it is advanced thought. It is at least a struggle to expand literal thinking. And when it is accomplished, when people at the ordinary level, when you've done it in the past, when you feel as though, and you have looked upon something, not any longer just a mountain, but you've looked upon a situation. You looked upon being rebuffed by somebody sexually, or you've looked upon being cheated, as you at first thought, in some business dealings, or insulted by a stranger, by a family member. People who are just good at the city level, at times, whether they use the term or not, they're doing it exactly, see that as being a metaphor. That what happened, or what I took to be what happened right then, is not the extent of it. And people even will say, and operate on the basis that they have benefited from seeing that. I no longer get as mad at people as I did. But it is seen as being, if not the final episode of their life, each time it happens, it appears to have been a worthwhile conclusion. That it is a movement from one place to another. That this sort of thing that used to terribly upset me, of someone treating me as though I were not their equal, or someone not giving due recognition when I tried to express my inner self, my talents. That used to disturb me greatly, but now I begin to see it, and you can make up your own version, but somebody could say to themselves, of course they'd have to say it to somebody else finally, or they would burst. They would say, well, I begin to see this as a metaphor. And you can go into historical precedents for it. A person could say, I no longer see just me trying to defend my own feeble little ego. I begin to see this as the struggle of humanity, the rational side of humanity, trying to break through the fetters of tyranny, trying to break through the weight of the Philistines who have no artistic and creative sentiments, I begin to see life itself is a little bud, a little acorn, and it's all struggling. Would the little acorn take it personally just because an ox came by on its way trying to fulfill its own mission and stepped on the acorn and temporarily cracked its skull or something? I begin to see life as a metaphor. Now, at the ordinary level, that is, without any doubt, taken as being a kind of achievement. And if all of us were stuck at living at sea level, I had to say this. For you, I'll go ahead and say it. It would probably be more interesting over the long run to be exposed to that kind of thinking, and it would put in literature, than it would be ultimately confronted with Mad Magazine. So that's not the point. It's not an attack on it, but understand at that level, to begin to separate, for individuals to begin to think that they have separated things, and not just mountains now. You got to push it into now like whole operations, aspects of human life and intercourse, that I have been offended. I am constantly thwarted in my aims at life. Or I see me and others who attempt to do good being misused, being unappreciated. But I begin to see not just the things, but even what in passing are processes. I no longer see them as simply that. I no longer see that the mountain is just a mountain. I begin to see even things of which I disapprove, things that apparently are to my own, at least temporal detriment. I see them not as direct frontal assaults on me. I begin to see the whole thing in a greater picture, a wider view. I begin to see it as a finger to my lips, a metaphor. And at that level, it is very satisfying. It's as good as anything else at the city level. But do you see that that is not the conclusion of anything? Not to a subversive. Because it is unknowingly reaffirming what the intellect does at the three-dimensional level, running off polarized energy. It is continuing to distinguish that there is a difference between what just happened to me and what I'm thinking happened to me. And suddenly, the spokesman for rational city intelligence leaps out in this conversation and says, wait a minute. That's some good stuff those people are doing that you yourself just described. Because you said that they're still seeing a distinction, or reaffirming a distinction between what things are and what they think they are. That was a cheap way of putting it, it says to me, because it was not simply doing that. You could always make that sound like some form of mental derangement. The person was seeing what was going on in life as a metaphor. It is not some kind of neural flaw. It is not some kind of psychological blind spot. It is, in fact, a kind of progress, because they're no longer looking upon life literally. They're now looking upon things, especially in their personal life, that would seem to have specific emotional consequence. They're beginning to see it as being metaphorical. That sounds a lot better than the way I first put it, didn't it? It is still distinguishing and reaffirming that there is a difference between the mountain and between the mountain as a metaphor, or down to real direct plain talk and thought, that there is a difference between the mountain and what I think of the mountain. Yeah, but I don't know what you think of the mountain. Sir, it doesn't matter what you think of the mountain. We got you and 14 billion, don't make me go through 999, you and the rest of them, put it all together, and you don't have to know an Irish song that does not spell mother. Nobody ever seems to laugh that you're not old enough to know the song. Anyway, you put together all 15 billion observations of the mountain, and then it doesn't matter what you say. I mean, sure it matters, no offense. But for you to say that it matters from your view compared to what I'm going to say, it doesn't matter, because your view now is registered right there. Did I not hear you say it? Did I not acknowledge? Yes. The difference between the mountain and whatever you think of the mountain has nothing to do with a judgment. It has nothing to do with a qualitative view of any kind. It is simply that there is a difference. But the ordinary intelligence, you cannot do anything with that. The sentence makes sense for a second, but that's why it ends up, it has never gone any further than a little midnight coffee and cigarettes and maybe a little Benzedrine with Philosophy 101 students. Just like, well, there is a difference. By God, that's a gym clip, and we all know it. We're sane. That's a gym clip. But by God, the thing, that gym clip, whatever that is, it's not exactly the same thing as the word gym clip. Ooh. Bring us some more coffee over here. Wow. Where'd you read that? Oh. It's fun for a second. I guess like if you're a hormonal-driven boy, it's probably the same kind of fun the first time you saw a picture of a naked woman that wasn't your mother. That's fun, you know. That there's a difference. And people go, wow, oh. And that's apparently the end of it, that was some real insight. But, you know, that's why it's never gone anywhere. I don't mean that one idea. That's why I know sequential, polarized driven thinking can go anywhere. Well, it can go somewhere if you consider getting on a merry-go-round, going somewhere. That by God, that was quite a ride. But boy, but it's real good to be back with your mother. You know, she puts you on there. If you're going to look upon life or age 21, or actually getting a woman instead of a magazine, that life puts you, you know, lifts you up and, you know, sits you and says, have a nice time. And you start off and you said, I looked upon my mother, or the mountain is my mother, and you go around and finally you looked right there and you saw other people. I no longer saw mothers. I began to see mothers as metaphors. Then you come back around and there's your mother, and you say, and then I got back and I saw motherism. So if you consider a merry-go-round taking a trip, which is all right, then, you know, bon voyage. Don't send me a lesson on French. It is not that there is some philosophical, theoretical, playing with your brain difference between a gym clip and the word or the idea, no matter what you call it, of gym clip. You do not have to waste your time going to take Philosophy 101. I mean, there it is. The word, and that's not the same. But to take that as being some sort of insight, and to even believe that you can go further instead of Philosophy 101 to go ahead and spend 5 or 6 years and get a PhD in philosophy and change the terminology and write your thesis on the basis that calling a man a philosopher is not the same as the man himself. And you know, it was 6 years on a merry-go-round to go from a gym clip to not a gym clip. The spoon here in our coffee sitting here in the student lounge when I'm 17, the spoon is not the same thing as the word the spoon. Then 5 or 6 years later to say, you can change the terminology, but they still take, even when they believe it's metaphorical, that they are thinking parabolically, symbolically. To believe that that is an actual conclusive step is the kind of thing I was suggesting musically, without singing it, would cause in Revolutionist City for there to be trouble. I'm talking about trouble, my friends. It starts with a T and etc. Because that is not any conclusion. It would be the jumping off point without spending 60 years, or hopefully not spending over 60 days. Or there is a seamlessness that we're not going to get around to by any means tonight, which is where I was going, but thanks to you, I spent 50 minutes with, you know, is everybody in tune? The overture. Oh, you can remember where you are, and we'll catch the rest of it next time. But there is a seamlessness that the ordinary intellect cannot see any more. It can see anything as being seamless. But there is a seamlessness that is the reality behind the shadows on the cave wall of people believing that there's metaphor, that there are metaphors, and then there are literal images, literal words. But there is a seamlessness to wherein there is no distinction. There simply is none. And it's not that one's better than the other. It's not that, well, we shouldn't do it or we should. There is simply none. It would be the same as the or similar to, all right. Let me use a metaphor. The visible light spectrum. That there is no doubt, an ordinary person will tell you that there is a difference between violet and red. But you do know that there is no distinction. I assume all of you know that much. There's no distinction. Or you can say, well, there is a clear distinction between a D, it's like we've got a keyboard here, on a D, and then an A down here. There's a fifth. There we can mathematically cut up, well, you can hear, if you're not tone deaf, there's a difference between a D and an A. Except for this. They're not separate. If we were playing with an oscillator that had an audio to it, all you got to do is keep turning this, and it does not jump. All you're doing is increasing the frequency of the sound waves. With colors from red to purple to violet, all you're doing is increasing or decreasing the light wave. But it is a function, a useful, a necessary function for street level people, that, wait a minute, there is a difference. That there is a distinct difference. There's a difference. I mean, if you're going to show up and it says formal attire, and everyone else, of course, as they should, civilized people are showing up in their lavender tuxedos, and you show up in a red one, talk about a fox pass. Or the difference in traffic lights. If you look up and it says red, and you think, well, red's just a variation of green, I'll press on. The intellect, for the absolute necessary purposes of city life, does see it as a distinction. But I assume you can follow that parallel so we can end it for the night. It is not a clear distinction. There is not some separate. You cannot separate red from violet. Now, I know the intellect says you can, but then you've got to go back a little further to begin to start realizing the background of everything. You can say, well, you can separate red from green because you can do it with light waves, or you can just go buy paint and do it the cheap way, let somebody else do the work for you. And you can say, well, these are two separate things. But you cannot separate them from the light spectrum. Because what you're dealing with is your perception of them. It's not a difference between red and green that they actually exist out there. You've got to go back to the background. You cannot separate red from the light spectrum. All right? You cannot separate violet from the light spectrum. Well, I know that. And then ordinary intellect cannot go, oh. Well, the truth is you can't separate red from violet. Sure you can. We will pick it up next time.